Good morning. We are live again this Tuesday morning. Thank you for joining us. I know no matter where you are, it's probably hot, hot, hot. It's hot everywhere. Um, our guest this morning is Caitlin Billings. She is joining us live from California. So it's very, very early where she is. And we appreciate you joining us this early in the morning.
Of course, yeah. It's an important topic that I'm here to talk about, so I'm happy to do it.
Thank you. We appreciate your time. I want to remind people that if you're joining us live, you may ask questions of our guests. You just put them in the comment section. I'll be looking for those and we'll pop up your questions or comments. And if you are watching a replay, you may put your questions and comments in the comment section and dialogue with other people watching replays. But Caitlin will not be available indefinitely to address comments in the comment section. Okay, we are talking about a very serious topic today. Suicide ideation is a sign that an individual is suffering deeply and that they must seek treatment. But what does that really mean and what does it look like, especially in tweens and teens versus popular cultural myths? We see a lot of movies lately based on this. Is that what's happening for real? Is that what we should be looking for? Or are there other signs, as the medical professionals say, how does it present in the real world?
Yeah. And in teens and tweens, especially, it can look a little bit different from adults, in that teens and tweens tend to not talk to their parents, particularly if they are, depressed or thinking about suicide. And something also to consider before I go into kind of the signs is that this generation is constantly exposed to media, on virtually, to media, to social media, particularly TikTok, Instagram. And in working with young people as a therapist, what I've learned, what I didn't know because I'm older, is that those types of social media actually have an algorithm. So what teens and tweens are looking at, the algorithm picks up on, and so then it gives them content that is similar to what they've been looking at. So if they've been looking at self-harm or suicidal, people who are suicidal or who have died by suicide, those kinds of situations, more and more content in that theme is going to pop up. So that's just something to be aware of that young people are facing today.
Yes.
Yeah. So
before we get into that,
yes,
tell us a little bit about yourself, your work, and your brand new book. We want to see that and hear about it.
Oh my gosh, yes. And I forgot my copy. Oh no.
Okay, we'll put up a link. The amazing Jessica will put up a link.
Yeah, so I am a licensed clinical social worker in the state of California. And I work with people I have a private practice, and I work with folks who have experienced trauma. And that can mean a lot of things. So trauma is a big umbrella. And throughout my career, I have found that I've really worked with folks with complex trauma, which means that they've experienced multiple traumas in their lives, often beginning with childhood trauma. I see a lot of suicidal ideation along with complex trauma, typically, because the symptoms that accompany complex trauma are often depression, difficulty sleeping, nightmares, anxiety, sometimes perfectionism, sometimes substance use. It can really vary. But you can imagine that going through something like that, nightmares, flashbacks, difficulty sleeping, somebody really might want to escape and end the suffering. And that's most often what suicide or suicidal ideation is all about, is to end the pain. It's not necessarily just to die. It's that they are suffering and they can't think of another way out. So that is my work, kind of in a nutshell. And I'm really drilling down into specializing and working with older teens and adults under the age of 30, because I have kids in that age bracket, I think, and also because, like I was saying, it's such an intense time for these young people to be alive, and they are just being saturated with a lot of messages. Like I said, that if they're looking at it, it's just popping up more and more. So yeah, that's my work in a nutshell.
So tell us about your book.
Oh my goodness. Okay. So speaking of suicidal ideation, so my book is about my own journey as both a professional and actually a psychiatric patient, and also about my eldest child, who, during the course of my own recovery and struggle with my own mental health, began to exhibit many of the same symptoms that I had experienced both in teenagehood and then adulthood. And so to see my, at the time, 12-year-old begin to suffer from these same symptoms, I was compelled to include their story, which was occurring actually while I was writing a memoir about myself. So I began to see these parallels not only in my story and my child's story, but in a universal theme of how do we accept ourselves both as imperfect people, as well as in my eldest's situation, as a person who doesn't fit the mold. And my eldest came out as a transgender male. And while we live in California, we live in the Bay Area, it's one of the most accepting places, there's still so much stigma. At the time, there was legislation coming out about transgender folks in the military and how, they weren't going to be allowed, and they weren't going to be allowed to transition if they were still in the military. And there was just so much, transgender folks in the bathroom, so much backlash. And so my book is about, yes, it's about me, it's about my eldest child, and it's really about this universal theme of we are all human, we're all suffering, no matter if we're a professional or a person who's experienced complex trauma. And in the psychiatric ward, we all matter, and we all are worth it, worth being alive. We don't have to be perfect. So that's what it's about. And I don't have it with me. It's early, and I totally forgot in my rush to be here. So
that's okay.
I apologize.
The title?
In Our Blood, which, has multiple meanings. It's about the family. It's about me and my eldest's bloodline connection in terms of our shared symptoms, but also I think our shared bravery. And yeah. And then if you have to read the book to find out more of what that double meaning is.
And it can be found in all the usual places.
Yeah, pretty much everywhere. Amazon, but if you're not interested in supporting Amazon, a lot of indie bookstores are selling it. You can find it in Powell's Books through Portland, Oregon. Apparently it's in Denmark. I mean, you name it, you can find it. So yeah.
I recommend that you take the time to find it. It is an award-winning book. It has won a few awards. I counted 3, and I think it's climbing. So I recommend that for people. For those of us who believe we know what suicidal ideation means. You know, we broke down sentences and words in elementary school so that we could understand things that were new to us. But just in case, can you define that term for us, please?
Yes. So suicidal ideation basically means that there's actually levels. So what we call passive suicidal ideation often means that someone isn't actively thinking about how they're going to die by suicide or when or has the means. It means that they're thinking about, gosh, how would it be if I could just go to sleep and not wake up? Maybe then, my pain and suffering would be over. Or what might happen if I'm just walking down the street and a car randomly hits me? So it's this sort of preoccupation with death, but it's not active. So we call it passive, right? It's sort of this passive thought of I might die. Then you move into active suicidal ideation. And what that means is that someone is actually formulating how they might die by suicide, and then even perhaps collecting the means. So that could mean obtaining a firearm if they don't have one. It could mean collecting medication so that they have enough for a lethal overdose. It could mean that they have a date that they are going to attempt to die by suicide.
Mm-hmm.
So, before I go any further, I meant to say this earlier. I just want folks who are listening or watching this to really take care of yourselves, because this is a heavy topic. So if we talk about something that feels really upsetting and you can feel yourself and your own system getting activated or overwhelmed, please take a break. Step away, turn it off. Watch it later if you're still interested, but really take care of yourself, because this is tough to talk about. And suicide touches many of us in the world. So yeah, I just wanted to say that.
Thank you for that.
Yeah. So that's suicidal ideation. It has levels, it has degrees, and it has myths. So I think we want to get into that. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Why don't we do this? Why don't you tell us a myth and then the reality? And then we'll hit a few of the dominant ones. And I'm going to depend upon you. I've looked up some, but I'm going to depend upon you to tell us what you're seeing in practice and what you know. And then we will, and these are specifically geared towards tweens and teens. I want our audience to know, although it may cover a broader group, but that's who we're talking about.
Yeah. So I think myth number one, and I actually, I forgot to say this, but one of the parts of my my career and my profession right now is that I supervise young clinicians who are earning their licenses to practice professionally and on their own. So they are getting support. They're actually working under my license. So they get a lot of support, and even they struggle with this myth that I'm about to say. So this isn't just the general population. This is even folks who are learning how to be therapists. So I would say the biggest myth is that if you talk to somebody about suicide, like if you see that somebody might be struggling or depressed and you wonder if they're thinking about it, the myth is that if you ask them, you're going to give them the idea. You're actually going to make it worse. And that is not the case. So I really want to get this one across. Like if you learn anything from this podcast, this is what I want you to know, is don't be afraid to ask your teen or tween if they're thinking about death, if they're thinking about what it might be like to die, or if they are actively making a plan to die by suicide. And you might hear that I'm using die by suicide. And I just want to put a little note out there that we used to say commit suicide, and we're moving into a different type of language and wording to be more, I think, sensitive to the topic, that it's not a moral or ethical issue. It's really about pain, and it doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter if you are, upper class, wealthy, of the 1%, or if you are literally without a home or a house and living under an overpass. Like, it touches everyone. So, yeah, that is the number one myth. And like I said, even young professionals, they'll tell me, like, I'm afraid to ask my client. I'm afraid that I'm going to like influence them. And so we talk a lot about, like, in fact, it's okay. And in fact, it's more helpful to, if you can, crawl down or, climb down into that dark hole that someone is in and sit with them and say, I'm here. And in fact, I'm interested in you telling me exactly what's going on and exactly what you're thinking about, because I care that much. I'm not afraid to ask you. So I know how hard it is as a parent to ask this question, because we don't want to hear it. We don't want to know how much pain our child is in, because it hurts us to know. But it is the number one thing that you can do to start to work with your teen or tween to get them help, if that is the case. So yeah, that's myth number one.
Before we get to the next one, we have a question that has to do with this. Our question is from Nita. Thank you, Nita, for your question. And she says she thinks that happens to her. She's afraid of asking because of that. How do you approach someone with the question?
Yeah, that's a great follow-up. So I would say that you want to be compassionate, and you don't want to just say, hey, are you thinking about dying by suicide? You want to start off by saying, hey, I've noticed that lately things have changed a little bit. You're doing things a little differently, or I've noticed that you seem sad. Can you sit with me just for a few moments and we talk about it? To kind of get permission. And if they don't give you permission, then you can say, like, I just want to share with you, I'm really, really concerned. And I do want to ask, have you been thinking about death or dying? So again, being direct is important, because sometimes that's your only opportunity to really get that question in there. But if you can get permission and kind of can be invited in, that's ideal. But if not, just say it. Just say, I hear you. You don't want to talk with me. So this is what's on my mind. Can you tell me what's on yours? Teens and tweens in particular really struggle with the idea that their parents don't respect them as beings, as people, that their parents sort of have this conception as like almost the oppressors, right? Like, they're in control of my life, and why would I tell them anything? So really if you can kind of broadcast that respect, like, I respect you as a person, and I'm asking your permission to have this conversation. That can go a long way. So I hope that answers your question. I can't remember the name.
Nita.
I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. She'll probably post an answer to you, but let's move on to myth number 2.
Okay. So number 2 myth. Yeah. Number 2 myth, I think, is that if a person begins to improve, that means that they're not thinking about it anymore. And that's a myth because, so there's a couple ways that people might exhibit improvement. One might be that they begin taking an antidepressant. So let me talk about that first.
Okay.
So when, particularly teens and tweens, this is really important. So for antidepressants, there is what we call a black box warning on any antidepressant, which is black box warning is to say, look at this. This is very important. And particularly in teens and tweens, studies show that risk of suicidal ideation actually is higher than in adults in taking these antidepressants. And so this can be a transient symptom, but it's something to really watch out for. So the myth is, in regard to antidepressants, that
Mhm.
if my teen or tween starts an antidepressant and they look like they're doing better, we're good. They're doing better. I can kind of relax, step back. And actually what we as clinicians look for is sometimes a person is so depressed that they don't even have the wherewithal to come up with a plan to die. They're just kind of preoccupied with it. That antidepressant brings them up just enough, so now they have energy to actually plan it. So this is something to really be watching out for, especially because of that black box warning. Is your teen or tween suddenly looking really different? Or is your teen or tween looking better and you're like, they look better, but I heard this podcast that maybe that's not when I sit back and relax, that's when I keep asking the question. So how are you doing? It looks like you're doing better. How are your thoughts about death? Or how are your sometimes we say, how are your thoughts about hurting yourself? Because that's a little bit broader, and teens and tweens do often engage in self-harm. So it's like an umbrella term, like, and maybe this answers your question too, Nita, is that's another way of asking, like, have you thought about harming yourself? Have you thought about hurting yourself? And if they say yes, or say something like, I've heard teens say this, well, if I was, I wouldn't tell you. That means they are. So again, kind of learning how to watch your teen. So that's kind of the case with antidepressants. The other time that we might see somebody rapidly improve, if they're taking an antidepressant, or even if they aren't, is that they've actually solidified their plan. And now they're relieved. Now they're like, okay, now I have a date. I know when this suffering is going to end, so I can kind of relax and just know there's a time and a place, and I have my means. And that burden is off me. So if you see somebody that, has been very angry, this is often a sign we see with teens and tweens, withdrawing, isolating, very sad, tearful, frequently preoccupied with death. Maybe you've seen inadvertently on their phone some stuff popping up, just even on their lock screen, that is coming from TikTok that might have that content. It's not a time to be like, oh, they're so much better. It's a time to actually be more concerned, because that could mean that they've set a date. And that's a time to really say, like, gosh, I've noticed that, you seem so free. You seem like you're really relaxed. I'm wondering about that. It's such a big change. And then you can follow up with, are you still thinking about hurting yourself? Because I know that was something we talked about last week or a couple weeks ago. And even educate. I mean, this is a time to say, like, hey, what I know is that sometimes when people, or when young people set a date or have a solidified plan, they feel a lot better. And it's hard to talk about, but I have to ask you, is that something that's happening for you? So again, that compassionate but direct. Hey, I know I'm educated now. I know what I'm looking for, and I see you. I respect you, and I see you as a person, and I'm concerned. So really, as a parent, that's the message you want to be sending. So that's the second myth, is that if somebody looks like they're doing better, it's not a time to be like, okay, we're good. It's a time to actually kind of dig in and say, like, hey, I'm still keeping an eye on you. Any follow-up on that?
Yeah, Well, we did hear from Nita. She
Oh,
wanted to let you know that yes, that did help. So thank you.
great.
And I don't have any follow up on myth number 2, so we can go into myth number 3. But if you do have a question or comment on 2 or even 1, please feel free to put it in the comment section and it will be addressed if you're watching us live. Thank you.
Okay, shall we move on to myth number 3?
Sure.
Okay. There's so many. I think myth number 3, oh gosh, there's a couple. One I want to really also talk about that is not only a myth, but is a what we call oh gosh, sorry, it's early, it's escaping me. Kind of a precursor or a something that's actually going to put you more at risk. So this myth is okay. So someone dies by suicide that either my teen knows or in our family, and so now my teen has seen what the effect is on the family, on the community. So they're not as at risk. Now they've seen, they can learn from that. I think parents sometimes think like, oh, our kids can learn from what others go through, right? Like we're going to show them and they're going to learn, and it's, now they're really educated. Actually, this is an added risk. So even if there's someone in your family that your teen grows up knowing about, this is a risk factor. And that's the word I was looking for, risk factor. So this is a risk factor really for teens or tweens or anyone that there have been studies, and I don't remember the percentage, but it's very high, that if someone in your teen's world, particularly if they are close to that person, it raises their risk of suicide quite a bit. So it's not necessarily something they're going to learn from. It's actually going to reinforce this idea that, yeah, I could end my pain too. Wow, or it's just so tragic that if they are depressed or they have any thoughts, that it can actually increase their depression and send them spiraling. So now some parents might be aware of that, but others might not. So that's a myth I want to talk about here too.
Wonderful. Thank you. I'm going to reiterate 3 of your points from our 3 myths because we're winding down on our time. This
Okay.
is a conversation we could have all day.
I have so much to say.
Me too. But before I do that, I want to put Nita up again. She has something important to say. So if a person has anxiety and her fear is to die, can this person have suicidal thoughts still?
That is such a good question, Nita. Thank you. I love this. So yes. And actually, this is an important idea too, that I want you to take from this is, yes, that person can. The great thing about this person is I'm guessing that this person is talking about it, like that you would know that this person has these fears. And what we're looking for actually when we're talking with someone about death by suicide is ambivalence, because I think almost 100% of people who are thinking about dying by suicide are ambivalent. And so if someone is talking about like, gosh, I'm anxious and I'm really preoccupied with this, that could mean that they have a little bit, their window of ambivalence is bigger, because this is a scary thing to think about, but it doesn't mean that they might not do it. And I can say from personal experience, I personally have had suicidal ideation, and it is extremely scary because it can feel like you're not in control anymore. But it doesn't mean that you might not make an attempt. So actually, that's a window in. If someone is talking about their anxiety, it's such a good time to say like, hey, yes, it's so scary. And I wonder if you feel like you're out of control and you feel like this might actually happen. Yeah, I hope that answers the question. And I know we're almost out of time. So yeah.
That's okay. We unlike network TV, we don't have a hard stop. We just like to respect people's time when we know that they're taking time out of their busy days. I am going to put up a comment. I'm going to read that comment. I'm also going to read some of the points that I want to reiterate that you made for our audience in case someone jumped in the middle. And while I'm doing that, you think about if there's another myth that we absolutely must know today, and we can get to that one. First, I'm going to reiterate a couple of things. I always take notes. That's why my eyes are wandering between taking notes and reading the comments. The first one, don't be afraid to ask your teen if they are thinking about dying by suicide. You won't give them an idea that isn't already there. What you will do is open up an opportunity for discussion.
Yes.
The next point is don't relax too soon. Continue checking in and asking, because an immediate change of behavior or perceived change of behavior can actually be a warning sign.
Mm-hmm.
The third point is proximity to someone dying by suicide is a risk factor, not a deterrent. So if that has happened in your community or in your teen or tweens community, you really need to touch in with them and communicate with them, because that's actually an added risk factor.
Mm-hmm.
And the third is ambivalence about death by suicide is another risk factor sign that if they're not either, you don't want them to obsess about death, but if they're ambivalent about it and you can't really get an answer or have them open a conversation that lets you know how they feel either way, that could be a sign that there's something that you need to further investigate with your teen or tween.
Yeah.
Deborah. Okay, yes. You go ahead. No, you go ahead.
Oh, no, I want to hear from Deborah.
Okay. Deborah says, it is so important for any parent, especially of tweens and teens, to watch this. I recommend sharing and encouraging parents to listen and learn prior to the time your kids are tweens and teens. Mm-hmm. Feel free to copy my words if you like. Thank you, Deborah. Then click the share button. Thank you, Deborah. We appreciate that. And we actually have another comment from her. Okay, here we go. Which is, thank you for this. Also add the 988 number that exists now for the suicide hotline. We have that, and Jessica is going to put that up because we are prepared to put that up. Thank you, Deborah.
Yes, and I also want to say they don't have to call; they can text.
Yes.
Which, oh my gosh, so important. My kids hate talking on the phone. In fact, they're very awkward. They don't know how to do it,
Yeah.
So the texting is so important. And you can really reiterate that to your teen or tween. You don't have to talk to anybody on the phone. You can just text them.
And here's a parenting tip for any situation. Since teens do not like to talk on the phone that much, if you respect that about them and text a lot, then when you do call, they will pick up because they know it's important. They know that you aren't overusing the telephone.
That's right. And can I just say too, if your teen or tween doesn't want to talk to you kind of out loud, like if you approach them and say, gosh, I'm concerned, are you thinking about hurting yourself? And they're like, that doesn't mean they're not thinking about it. So another way is actually to text them and say, hey, how are you doing? Kind of engage them that way. And often I've had success with that with my own kids. They'll engage with me more over text. So that might be another way to say, hey, I'm concerned about you. Are you thinking about dying? Are you thinking about hurting yourself?
Thank you for that. Thank you very much. Is there another myth or anything else that we should make sure we get in during this broadcast?
Well, I just want to say that looking at our teens aren't necessarily going to show us in an adult kind of way that they're sad or depressed. That often teens show us through anger. So anger is often a sign, like irritability or anger. It can be a sign that your teen is moving into depression. So that's actually a risk factor to look for. And that's a myth. It's like, my teen is gosh, they're just difficult. This is such a difficult time. Actually, that's a sign that your teen might not be doing well, especially if they were kind of a happy kid and then they move into teenagehood and they're just so irritable and angry. One more, if I can put this
Please.
in. I've heard this from parents. They're just trying to get attention. Oh my gosh. I hear this a lot. They're just trying to get attention. It's all they talk about. They cut their arm. It's not that deep. They just, that is not the case. They are not just trying to get attention. Mm-hmm. They are trying to get your attention because they are not doing well. So please don't write it off as, oh, my kid's attention seeking and they just need to suck it up. Mm-hmm. No, they really need help. I've talked to so many young adults who say, my parents just told me I was looking for attention, and that actually made it worse. I felt like they didn't see me. So just want to say that too.
That's an important one. Thank you. So that's another myth that they are looking for attention, but for a very important reason, and that they need help. So please give them the attention. Don't dismiss it.
Yes.
Okay. This conversation, thank you so much, Caitlin. We are grateful that you have joined us. This is not the end of the conversation. This discussion will continue on Thursday evening at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. We have a webinar that discusses, if your teen is depressed, what do you do? Or do you know if they're depressed? What are your teen's moods telling you? Is it regular teen behavior, or should you investigate? Is there something more? We have a webinar on this Thursday, July 28th at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. You must register for it. If you aren't available, still register, even if you aren't available live, because you will receive the replay, and that way you can watch it on your own time. So please register. The registration link is in the comment section, and that will be your next opportunity to continue this conversation. It won't be the last, but it will be the next one for this week. I appreciate your time, Caitlin. This is very important. It's going to go far to helping people.
Yeah, thank you so much. And please use me as a resource. I have, it's not my professional website actually as a therapist, but it is my website about my book and who I am. And on the contact page, there is a link to my personal author email. So please reach out if you have further questions. I would be happy to answer any.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for joining us for this important conversation. And we look forward to having you join us on Thursday evening.
CaitlinBillings.com.
And it's up there. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.